The Thornfield Mystery. It was the hot summer of 1806 in Savannah, Georgia. The air was thick and heavy. Old oak trees hung with Spanish moss that looked like gray fingers reaching toward the ground. The busy town was full of life. People selling things in the streets, fancy ladies walking with umbrellas to block the sun, and ships coming into the harbor from faraway places. But outside the busy town, there stood a big white house called Willor. It belonged to the rich Thornfield family. Dr. James Montgomery had been a doctor for many years, but he had never seen anything like what was waiting for him at that house. The letter asking him to come was short but worried. It was written by William Thornfield, who owned the big house and lots of land. "Dr. Montgomery," the letter said, "I need your help right away. Something very strange has happened to my children. It goes against everything we know about how things work. Please come fast. Bring your best tools and be ready to write down what you see. I think this might get worse." As Dr. Montgomery rode his horse and buggy down the dusty road to Willor, he thought about William Thornfield. They had studied medicine together in Philadelphia about 30 years ago. But William had quit being a doctor to take care of his family's big plantation after his father died. William was always smart and didn't believe in silly superstitions. If William was asking for help, something really unusual must be happening. The Georgia countryside rolled past him. There were big cotton fields where enslaved people worked, thick forests of pine and oak trees, and sometimes he could see other big plantation houses in the distance. The summer heat was terrible. His shirt stuck to his back even though it was still early morning. Dr. Montgomery wiped his forehead with a cloth and wondered how people in the South could wear fancy clothes in such hot weather. He thought again about William's letter. The words "goes against everything we know" made him curious and worried at the same time. Dr. Montgomery had built his reputation by solving hard medical cases. He always kept an open mind about medicine. But something in William's desperate tone bothered him. It hinted at something beyond normal medical problems. The buggy turned onto a long road lined with huge old oak trees. Their branches made a roof of shade that felt good after the hot sun. At the end of this beautiful road stood Willor, a massive white house with tall columns. It sat on a small hill surrounded by perfect gardens and smaller buildings. On a normal day, Dr. Montgomery might have admired how grand and rich it looked. But today the house seemed threatening somehow. Its dark windows looked like eyes watching him arrive. William Thornfield met him at the door himself, instead of having a servant do it like usual. This was not normal for a rich Southern gentleman. William looked terrible. His once proud posture was bent over, and his strong body looked thin with worry. "James, thank God you came," William said, pulling him inside quickly. He didn't bother with the usual polite small talk. "I sent most of the house servants away. What I'm going to show you must stay between us." The local doctor ran away after visiting twice. He kept crossing himself and talking about witchcraft. "I need a man of science, not superstition." Dr. Montgomery nodded seriously. "Of course, William. You mentioned your children in your letter." William's eyes grew dark. "Yes, my 4 children. What has happened to them?" His voice broke. "It just can't be real. But I've watched it with my own eyes for 6 months now, writing down everything I see. Come." They're waiting in the library. The library was a beautiful room with shelves that went up 2 stories high. A fire burned in the fireplace even though it was summer outside. 4 people sat around the room, 2 young men and 2 young women. They all had the same Thornfield features: high cheekbones and bright blue eyes. "My children," William said. "Thomas, my oldest at 26. Josephine, 24. Nathaniel, 21. And Eleanor, my youngest at 19. Dr. Montgomery bowed politely and looked at each face carefully. All 4 looked healthy at first glance, though a bit pale. He didn't see anything wrong right away. "Children," William continued. "This is Dr. Montgomery, an old friend and trusted doctor. He'll be staying with us to watch and write down what's happening to you." The 4 brothers and sisters looked at each other with meaningful glances. "Father, this isn't necessary," said Thomas, standing up. "We've talked about this. Maybe we just look young for our ages." Dr. Montgomery noticed that Thomas did look remarkably young for 26. His face had no lines, and he moved like a much younger person. "Show him, Thomas," William said quietly. "Show him the painting." Thomas didn't want to, but he walked to a covered painting on the wall. He pulled away the cloth to show a family portrait that was clearly painted recently by a good artist. "This was painted for my birthday last December," William explained. "Only 7 months ago." Dr. Montgomery stepped closer, very curious now. In the painting, Thomas looked like a man in his mid-20s with the beginning of wrinkles around his eyes and a mature look about him. But the Thomas standing in front of him now looked barely out of his teenage years. The doctor looked at Josephine in the painting. She appeared as a fully grown woman with the subtle signs of being in her mid-20s. But the Josephine sitting by the window looked much younger, her features softer and more girlish. The same thing was true for Nathaniel and Eleanor. Each one looked much younger than they did in the painting from just 7 months ago. "I don't understand," Dr. Montgomery admitted. His scientific mind couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. "None of us do," replied William. "But there's more. Show him the journals, Josephine." Josephine brought out a stack of leather books from a nearby desk. "We've each been writing down the changes we've noticed in ourselves and each other," she explained. Her voice had the refined tones of her expensive education, though she now looked like a girl of perhaps 20 or younger. Dr. Montgomery took the journals, feeling both the weight of the books and the mystery they contained. "I've prepared a room for you," William said. "You can stay as long as you need to watch and write down what you see. I've been keeping my own notes too." "Of course," the doctor replied, still shocked by what he was seeing. "I'll need to examine each of you carefully if you agree." The siblings looked at each other again with those meaningful glances. "We agree," Thomas answered for the group, though he sounded resigned rather than enthusiastic. That evening, after examining each sibling and reading their journals late into the night, Dr. Montgomery sat at the desk in his room, writing his first observations by lamplight. July 15, 1806. "I have found a medical mystery that goes beyond all reasonable explanation." The 4 Thornfield siblings seemed to be aging backwards, not just staying young, but actually becoming younger. Thomas Thornfield, the oldest at 26 years, now looks like a young man of about 18 or 19 years old. His voice has gotten higher. A small scar on his arm from a riding accident 3 years ago has gotten much smaller. Josephine, 24, now looks no older than 19. Most telling, a wisdom tooth that came in last year has gone back into the gum. Nathaniel, 21, now looks like a boy of 16. The facial hair that used to require daily shaving now appears only lightly. Eleanor, 19, now looks no older than 14 or 15. Most worrying, according to her private journal which she shared reluctantly, her monthly courses that had been regular for 5 years have become irregular and light. All siblings report more energy, better eyesight, and the disappearance of minor health problems. Thomas notes that a slight knee stiffness from a hunting accident has completely vanished. The reversal seems to be happening at a steady rate of about 1 year of physical regression every month. If this continues, the results would be catastrophic. Dr. Montgomery put down his pen and rubbed his tired eyes. If his calculations were right and the regression continued at this pace, within 2 years Thomas would have the physical body of a baby. And then, the doctor didn't want to think about what might happen after that. In all his years as a doctor, he had never seen anything like this. He had read about rare disorders that prevented aging, but never anything that reversed it. This wasn't just unlikely, it should be impossible. But the evidence was right in front of him, carefully documented by William Thornfield, a man trained in scientific observation. "Did you sleep well, doctor?" William asked as they ate breakfast in the morning room. The siblings were notably absent. "I must admit I didn't," Dr. Montgomery replied. "My mind was too busy with questions." "William, have you considered unusual causes?" William's face darkened. "You mean witchcraft or such nonsense? I thought you were above such superstitions, James." "Not at all," the doctor said quickly. "I meant to ask if you've investigated any unusual exposures." perhaps some local plant or mineral on your lands, something they all might have eaten or drunk. William shook his head. I've thought of everything. They eat the same food I do, drink the same water. They haven't traveled together recently or met any unusual people or substances as a group. The only thing they have in common is their blood relation. And you yourself show no signs of this regression? None at all. I continue to age normally more quickly, if anything, due to the stress of this situation. Dr. Montgomery nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to speak with each sibling alone today, if I may. Perhaps there's some common experience they've forgotten to mention. Of course, they're expecting you. Thomas is in the study, Josephine in the garden, Nathaniel in the stables, and Eleanor in the music room. Thomas Thornfield sat stiffly behind his father's desk, trying to look authoritative even though his increasingly youthful appearance made this difficult. Once the heir with all the bearing of a future plantation master, he now looked more like a boy pretending to be a man. The study showed generations of Thornfield wealth and education. Leather books lined the walls, mixed with maps of the plantation's large holdings. Hunting trophies, a big deer head and boar tusks mounted on wood watched silently from above. The heavy wooden desk where Thomas sat had belonged to his grandfather. Its surface showed the wear of decades of use. Through the windows, enslaved people could be seen working in the distant cotton fields, their movements coordinated under the watchful eye of an overseer on horseback. The contrast between the cool, ordered interior of the study and the brutal labor outside was not lost on Dr. Montgomery. I appreciate your directness, Doctor, Thomas said after listening to Montgomery's questions. His voice carried the educated accent of a young man schooled in the finest northern institutions, though it had gotten higher in recent weeks. Unlike my father, I have no illusions that this can be explained by your medical books. He ran a hand through his hair, once styled in the fashionable manner of a gentleman, now hanging boyishly over his forehead. The gesture showed his frustration at the changes happening to his body. A month ago, Thomas had been courting the daughter of a neighboring planter. Now, such attention would seem inappropriate, even ridiculous. You have another explanation? The doctor asked, noting how Thomas's once perfectly fitted waistcoat now hung loosely on his shrinking frame. Thomas glanced toward the door before lowering his voice. Have you heard of the Fountain of Youth, Doctor? The Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon sought it in Florida, not far from here. Dr. Montgomery frowned. Surely you don't suggest. I suggest nothing, Thomas interrupted. I merely point out that there have always been legends of miraculous waters. Perhaps some underground spring feeds our well. But your father drinks the same water and shows no effects. Thomas smiled thinly. True, but there is something else we share that our father does not. And what might that be? Our mother's blood. Thomas's expression grew distant. She died bringing Eleanor into this world. Father rarely speaks of her, but I remember her stories. Strange tales of her ancestors, of secret knowledge passed through generations of women in her family. What kind of knowledge? Rituals, potions, ways to speak with those beyond the veil. Thomas shrugged. Childish nonsense most likely, but she also kept a book bound in red leather with strange symbols. After her death, Father locked it away. Said it was full of dangerous nonsense. Dr. Montgomery made a note to ask William about this book. Have you discussed these memories with your siblings? Josephine remembers more than I do. She was Mother's favorite. A flash of something resentment perhaps crossed Thomas's face. You should ask her about the necklace. Josephine Thornfield cut roses with careful snips of her shears, arranging them in a basket with artistic care. Her movements were graceful, though Dr. Montgomery noticed she occasionally seemed surprised by her own body, as if adjusting to its changing proportions. The garden was full of color and sweet smells, clearly Josephine's passion. Geometric beds of flowers were laid out in a formal pattern like European designs rather than typical southern gardens. Stone paths wound between them, leading to a central fountain where water trickled softly over carved marble. These grounds were wild when Father bought this property, Josephine explained, following the doctor's admiring gaze. Mother designed this garden herself. I've maintained it according to her plans. Pride colored her voice as she gestured toward a particularly bright bed of exotic blooms. She had unusual tastes, preferred specimens that shouldn't grow well in this climate, yet somehow they do. Dr. Montgomery noticed how the conversation naturally turned to Caroline Thornfield without his prompting. Perhaps Josephine needed to speak of her mother despite the family's apparent reluctance to discuss her. "Thomas mentioned your mother's necklace," the doctor said after some preliminary small talk, watching Josephine's reaction carefully. Josephine's shears paused mid-cut, hovering over a perfect white rose. "Did he? How interesting." She resumed cutting, though her posture had stiffened noticeably. "It was just a trinket, a silver pendant with a strange design. Mother called it a talisman. She wore it always." A honeybee buzzed lazily past, settling on a nearby flower. Josephine watched it with unexpected intensity, as if the insect's movements held some secret message. "May I see it?" "You may not," Josephine replied coolly, placing another rose in her basket with deliberate care. "It was buried with her." "I see. And this book Thomas mentioned is gone?" she interrupted, her voice sharp as her shears. "Father burned it after Eleanor began showing symptoms." She snipped another rose with unnecessary force, nearly cutting it at the base rather than at the stem. "Symptoms? You consider this condition an illness?" Josephine turned to face him fully, her eyes suddenly intense. "Don't you, doctor? We are moving backward through time. Our minds remain intact for now, but for how long? Will we eventually lose our memories, our learned abilities, our very selves? Will we return to infancy, to nothingness?" Her composure cracked, revealing genuine fear beneath. "I was engaged to be married this autumn. Now my intended doesn't recognize me. Thinks I'm my own younger cousin." She laughed bitterly. "Father sent him away with some excuse about me traveling to Europe indefinitely." "I'm truly sorry," Dr. Montgomery offered, realizing for the first time the profound social implications of the siblings' condition. "Mother warned us," Josephine said so quietly the doctor almost missed it. "Warned you about what?" But Josephine had already composed herself, her moment of vulnerability passing like a cloud across the sun. "Nothing of consequence, merely a mother's superstitions. If you'll excuse me, the heat is becoming uncomfortable." Unlike his older siblings, Nathaniel Thornfield made no attempt to maintain the pretense of his actual age. Dressed in riding clothes too large for his shrinking frame, he laughed as he demonstrated his newfound agility, swinging from a stable beam with one arm. "It's not all tragedy, doctor," he called down. "I feel wonderful every day. I didn't even know I had simply vanish. I can run faster, jump higher than I could a year ago." The stables were Nathaniel's domain, filled with the earthy smells of hay, leather, and horses. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, lighting up bits of dust that danced in the air. 6 fine horses occupied the stalls, their coats gleaming with the care Nathaniel personally oversaw. "Yesterday I outran Thunderbolt," he continued, dropping to the ground and gesturing toward an impressive black stallion. "My favorite horse, the fastest in the county. I was on foot and I beat him over a short distance." His eyes gleamed with excitement. "I've been keeping records. My strength increases about 12% every month. My speed by nearly 15. But surely you understand the concerning direction this is headed," Dr. Montgomery responded, watching the young man who now appeared to be barely 16 swing with the abandon of a child. Nathaniel's expression sobered momentarily. "Of course I do. I'm not a fool." He walked to a workbench where a journal lay open, filled with carefully recorded measurements and observations. "I've calculated it all. In 3 months, I'll have the body of a 12-year-old. 3 months after that, 8. And then," he shrugged, the casual gesture hiding the gravity of what he described. "But while Thomas broods and Josephine cries over her lost marriage prospects, I've decided to enjoy however much time I have left as myself. As yourself, before I become too young to remember who I am." Nathaniel's smile faltered momentarily, revealing the fear he kept carefully hidden beneath his enthusiastic exterior. That's what will happen, isn't it? Eventually. I don't know, the doctor admitted. This condition has no precedent in medical literature. Nathaniel nodded, his momentary seriousness passing. Well then, no sense dwelling on it. Would you like to see how high I can jump now? I've been measuring. It increases by about a quarter inch each week. Dr. Montgomery made careful notes of Nathaniel's observations about his physical capabilities, impressed by the young man's methodical documentation despite his seemingly carefree attitude. Your siblings mentioned your mother's book and a necklace, he ventured as Nathaniel led his favorite horse from its stall. Ah, mother's mysteries, Nathaniel replied with forced lightness. She was a strange woman by all accounts. I barely remember her myself, yet this condition seems connected to her somehow. Nathaniel's hands stilled on the horse's bridle. Perhaps Eleanor would know more. She's the one who found the book, after all. Eleanor Thornfield sat at the pianoforte, her fingers moving across the keys with practiced precision. The music she played was complex, requiring considerable skill. Yet her hands now appeared to be those of a much younger girl, slender and smaller than they must have been when she learned the piece. Mozart's sonata in C major filled the room with poignant beauty that seemed to underscore the tragedy of their situation. She finished the movement before acknowledging the doctor's presence with a nod. I can still play everything I learned, she said without preamble. But my hands are changing. Certain reaches become more difficult each day. She demonstrated by attempting an octave stretch that her smaller fingers now struggled to span. Last week, I could play this passage with ease. Now, she shook her head in frustration. The music room was Eleanor's sanctuary, a place of order and harmony in contrast to the chaos unfolding in her body. Sheet music was carefully arranged on shelves, instruments displayed with care. A portrait of her mother hung on the wall opposite the pianoforte, the only such image displayed prominently in the house. In it, Caroline Thornfield sat at this very instrument, her expression serene yet somehow knowing, as if she held secrets just beyond the viewer's understanding. Your mother was musical as well? Dr. Montgomery inquired, nodding toward the portrait. She taught me everything I know, Eleanor replied, a rare smile softening her features. Father says I have her hands. Had her hands? She corrected, looking down at her increasingly childlike fingers with dismay. Dr. Montgomery sat on a nearby chair, the light from the tall windows casting his shadow long across the polished floor. Your brother mentioned you found your mother's book. Eleanor's gaze dropped to her lap. I shouldn't have. Father kept it locked away for good reason. What was in this book? Rituals? Recipes? Strange diagrams. Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. Mother's family came from Haiti originally. They practiced arts unknown in polite society. Voodoo? The doctor asked, familiar with tales of such practices in the Caribbean and Louisiana. Eleanor nodded almost imperceptibly. Among other things, the book was written in several languages. I could only understand portions of it. And did you attempt any of these rituals? Her eyes flashed up to meet his, suddenly defensive. Not intentionally, at least not the one that did this. I only wanted to know more about her. Father never speaks of her. It's as if he wants to erase her memory entirely. What happened to the book? Father burned it when Thomas first started showing symptoms. He blamed me. Her voice cracked. Perhaps he was right to do so. What do you mean? Eleanor hesitated. There was a ritual for speaking with the dead on the anniversary of Mother's death last year. I tried to contact her. I used her necklace. I thought the necklace was buried with her. A bitter smile crossed Eleanor's face. Josephine always assumes she knows everything. The necklace was never buried with Mother. Father kept it, though he claimed to have discarded it. And this ritual you performed, it required blood from all of Mother's children. I took a sewing needle to each of them while they slept. Just a tiny prick of the finger. They never knew. Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. I mixed our blood with wine in Mother's silver chalice. Another item Father had hidden away rather than destroyed. I said the words from the book, wore the necklace, and what happened? Nothing. Or so I thought. Eleanor looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. But 1 month later, Thomas mentioned that his clothes seemed looser. Josephine's fiancé commented that she looked remarkably youthful. It began so gradually that we didn't connect it to the ritual until it was too late. You should have told me about your wife's background, Dr. Montgomery said, pacing before William's desk. About the book, the necklace, the ritual Eleanor performed. William Thornfield's face was pale. She told you. She's consumed by guilt, William. She believes she caused this. Perhaps she did. Perhaps she did, William replied, his voice hollow. Caroline, my wife, she warned me before she died. Said her family was different, special, that our children might inherit certain proclivities. What exactly was Caroline? William laughed bitterly. What was she? A witch, if such things exist. A practitioner of dark arts passed down through generations of her maternal line. I didn't believe it when we married. She was so beautiful, so seemingly normal. His voice softened with remembrance. It wasn't until after Thomas was born that I began to notice strange occurrences. Plants that bloomed out of season in her presence, animals that flocked to her unnaturally, storms that seemed to mirror her moods. Dr. Montgomery listened silently, his rational mind struggling against what he was hearing. I loved her despite it all, William continued. But when she was dying after Eleanor's birth, she made me promise to watch over the children carefully. Said that her power would manifest in them someday, especially in her daughters. He shook his head. I thought if I destroyed her books, her talismans, forbade any mention of her practices, I could protect them from that inheritance. Instead, you drove them to seek it out in secret, Dr. Montgomery observed without judgment. Yes, William's admission was barely audible. And now they're paying the price for my failure. This necklace Eleanor mentioned. You kept it hidden. Do you still have it? William hesitated, then pulled a chain from around his neck, revealing a silver pendant that had been hidden beneath his shirt. The design was intricate, a series of interlocking spirals surrounding a central eye-like shape. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it, William confessed. It was her most prized possession. Dr. Montgomery examined the pendant carefully. And the chalice Eleanor mentioned. In my bedroom. I'll fetch it. The chalice was small but exquisitely crafted, ancient symbols etched around its rim. Inside, traces of a dark residue remained. This may be where our answers lie, Dr. Montgomery said. With your permission, I'd like to analyze this residue. For 3 days, Dr. Montgomery worked tirelessly, using every scientific method at his disposal to analyze the mysterious substance in the chalice. He dissolved portions in various solutions, observed reactions, documented results. Meanwhile, the siblings' condition continued to progress. Thomas, once 26, now appeared no older than 17. Josephine looked like a girl of 18. Nathaniel resembled a boy of 15. And Eleanor, most alarmingly, now had the appearance of a girl of just 13. On the evening of the 3rd day, Dr. Montgomery called the family together in the library. I believe I understand what has happened, he announced, his expression grave. The ritual Eleanor performed was not, as she thought, meant to communicate with the dead. Based on the symbols I've translated and the composition of the residue, it appears to have been a ritual of renewal, literally turning back time within the body. Can it be reversed? Thomas demanded, leaning forward in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. Dr. Montgomery hesitated, carefully choosing his words. I don't know with certainty, but I have a theory about the progression of your condition. He stroked his beard, a habit that emerged whenever he was deep in thought. Your mother's book, or rather Eleanor's transcriptions, suggests that such magic follows strict patterns. Nothing in nature is truly random, even that which appears supernatural. Patterns can be predicted, William offered, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. And if predicted, then possibly counteracted, the doctor completed with a nod. Precisely. He unfolded a chart on the library table. I've plotted the rate of your regression against time. It's not linear as I first thought. The rate is increasing slightly with each passing week. Thomas, you initially lost approximately 1 year of physical age per month. Now you're losing closer to 5 weeks for every 4 that pass. What does that mean? Josephine asked, her voice trembling. It means the process is accelerating. By my calculations, within 18 months, you will all physically regress to infancy. A heavy silence fell over the room. And then, Nathaniel finally asked. Dr. Montgomery's expression was pained. I don't know. Logic suggests the regression would continue until we cease to exist entirely, Eleanor finished, her young face pale with horror. Unmade. We must find a solution, William insisted, desperation edging his voice. There must be something in Caroline's traditions, some counter-ritual. Perhaps, Dr. Montgomery agreed. But we lack her knowledge, her book. Not entirely, Eleanor said quietly. All eyes turned to her. I copied portions of the book before Father burned it. The parts that seemed most important. I have them hidden in my room. William's face showed a mixture of anger and hope. Show us. Now. Eleanor lifted a loose floorboard beneath her bed, extracting a small bundle of papers covered in her neat handwriting, interspersed with carefully copied symbols. Dr. Montgomery and William pored over the pages, trying to make sense of the fragmented information. Here, Dr. Montgomery pointed to a passage. It speaks of balance. What is given must be returned. What is taken must be repaid. What does that mean in practical terms? William demanded. The ritual took years from your children's future and gave them to their past, the doctor theorized. Perhaps those years must be returned somehow. Returned to whom? Thomas asked. We can hardly give them back to ourselves. A heavy silence fell as the implication became clear. No, William said firmly. If you're suggesting what I think you are. The law of equivalent exchange, Eleanor interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Mother spoke of it often. To gain something, something of equal value must be given. You're speaking of sacrificing someone else's years, William said, horrified. That's unconscionable. Not necessarily someone else's, Dr. Montgomery said slowly, an idea forming. The ritual used blood from all 4 siblings combined, not separate. What if the reversal requires the same? You think we might be able to redistribute the years among ourselves? Josephine asked. It's possible. Instead of all 4 of you regressing to nothing, perhaps 3 could return to normal while 1. He couldn't finish the sentence. While 1 takes the full burden and regresses 4 times as quickly, Thomas completed grimly. Essentially sacrificing themselves. I'll do it, Eleanor said immediately. This is my fault. I performed the ritual. No, her siblings responded in unison. I'm the eldest, Thomas argued. The responsibility is mine. You're the heir, Nathaniel countered. The estate needs you. I have no such obligations. This is absurd, Josephine interjected. We cannot simply decide which of us should cease to exist. None of you will sacrifice yourselves, William declared with paternal authority. There must be another way. Dr. Montgomery continued studying Eleanor's notes. Perhaps we're thinking too literally. Says here, time flows like a river. It cannot be destroyed, only diverted. Meaning, William prompted. Meaning perhaps we don't need to reverse the flow, merely redirect it. The doctor pointed to another passage. This symbol here represents a crossroads, and this text speaks of binding time to that which exists beyond it. Beyond time? Josephine questioned. What exists beyond time? Death, Eleanor whispered. Mother always said death existed outside of time. A chill passed through the room at her words. We are not performing death rituals, William stated firmly. Not death itself, Dr. Montgomery clarified, excitement building as the solution began to take shape in his mind. But perhaps something that represents the passage between life and death. A threshold. The cemetery, Thomas suggested, where Mother is buried. Too public, William objected. We can't risk being observed. The old oak, Eleanor said suddenly. The one struck by lightning the day Mother died. She always said it was special to her. A doorway of sorts. The moon hung full and heavy in the Georgia sky as the Thornfield family and Dr. Montgomery gathered around the massive, partially blackened oak tree. The doctor had spent the day preparing, using Eleanor's notes and William's reluctant knowledge of Caroline's practices to devise a counter-ritual. Night birds called hauntingly from the surrounding forest. Fireflies blinked like earthbound stars among the tall grasses. In the distance, a whippoorwill's melancholy cry punctuated the symphony of crickets and frogs. The summer night was alive with sound and scent, magnolia blooms, damp earth, and the faint, unexplainable aroma of ozone that seemed to emanate from the lightning-scarred tree itself. The ancient oak stood at least 60 feet tall, its massive trunk bearing a jagged black scar from crown to roots where lightning had struck it the day of Eleanor's birth and Caroline's death. Despite this wound, the tree had survived, though it had not produced acorns in 19 years, a detail William had shared with strange emphasis. Eleanor had explained earlier that in her mother's beliefs, lightning-struck trees served as conduits between worlds, not dead, but transformed, touched by forces beyond mortal understanding. Caroline had often come to this tree to perform what she called her observances, particularly on nights of the full moon. The silver chalice sat at the base of the tree, filled with a mixture Dr. Montgomery had prepared: spring water, crushed herbs from Caroline's preserved garden, and most importantly, fresh blood from each of the 4 siblings. The concoction gleamed darkly in the moonlight, its surface occasionally rippling though no wind disturbed it. The necklace must complete the circuit, the doctor explained, holding Caroline's silver pendant. Its intricate design seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles, the central eye-like shape appearing to blink in the flickering light of their lanterns. As it was present in the original ritual, William looked on anxiously, his normally commanding presence diminished by fear for his children. He had objected initially to this plan, arguing that they were merely compounding one blasphemy with another. But as the siblings' regression continued to accelerate, he had finally conceded there was no conventional medical solution to their affliction. Dr. Montgomery directed the siblings to stand at 4 points around the tree, forming a square. Each held a candle, its flame dancing in the night breeze. "Remember," the doctor cautioned, "I cannot guarantee this will work. The science, if it can be called such, is beyond my full comprehension, but the principles of balance and redirection seem sound." "What exactly do you believe will happen?" William asked, his voice tense. "If my theory is correct, the years being stripped from your children will be bound to this tree instead," Dr. Montgomery explained. "It will serve as an anchor, drawing the regression away from them." "And if you're wrong?" The doctor met William's gaze steadily. "Then we will have lost nothing but time, something already slipping away from them regardless." With solemn nods, the siblings indicated their readiness. Dr. Montgomery placed the necklace in the chalice and began reciting the words Eleanor had copied from her mother's book, his pronunciation careful and measured. The night seemed to grow darker around them, the moonlight dimming as if being absorbed by the ritual itself. As the final words left his lips, the doctor used a small knife to prick his own finger, adding his blood to the mixture, a contribution he hadn't mentioned to the others, believing that, as the facilitator, he too must have skin in this dangerous game. For a moment nothing happened. Then, without warning, the liquid in the chalice began to bubble and steam, despite the cool night air. The pendant within it glowed with an unearthly light. "It's working," Eleanor whispered, her eyes wide. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. The ancient oak seemed to groan, its bark creaking and shifting. Before their amazed eyes, the lightning scar on the trunk began to heal, the blackened wood regaining its natural color. "The tree!" Josephine gasped. "It's absorbing the years." As they watched, fascinated, the siblings felt a strange sensation, not painful but powerful, like being pulled in opposite directions at the same time. Thomas was the first to notice the change in himself. Looking down at his hands, he saw the veins becoming more prominent, the knuckles slightly more defined, the hands of a man rather than a boy. One by one, the siblings experienced the shift, a rapid aging back to their proper states. Josephine felt her body regaining its mature proportions. Nathaniel's voice deepened mid-exclamation. Eleanor grew taller before their eyes, her childish features melting into those of a young woman. The oak tree, meanwhile, underwent its own transformation. Leaves that had been withering suddenly appeared fresh and green. Branches that had begun to sag stood straight and strong. The entire tree pulsed with renewed life. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon ceased. The chalice's contents turned to ordinary-looking liquid once more, the pendant's glow fading. Dr. Montgomery approached each sibling in turn, examining them carefully by lantern light. "Remarkable," he murmured. "You appear to have returned to your proper ages." William embraced his children one by one, tears streaming down his face. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God." But Eleanor's attention remained fixed on the oak tree. "Look," she said, pointing to its base, where there had been only dirt before. Small white flowers now bloomed, dozens of them, their petals luminous in the moonlight. "Mother's favorites," Josephine recognized. "Moonflowers. They only bloom at night." "A sign, perhaps," Dr. Montgomery suggested, "that your mother approves of our intervention." William approached the tree reverently, placing his hand on its bark. "Caroline," he whispered, "I'm sorry I tried to erase you from our lives. Your children needed your knowledge after all. You understand why no one can ever know of this," William said as Dr. Montgomery packed his medical instruments the next morning. "Of course," the doctor agreed. "Who would believe it anyway? I'm not certain I would believe it myself had I not witnessed it with my own eyes. What will you tell your colleagues about your extended absence?" "That I was consulting on a case of rare tropical fever," Montgomery replied with a slight smile. "Not entirely untrue in its way." William handed him a sealed envelope. "Your payment as agreed, with additional compensation for your extraordinary services." Dr. Montgomery accepted it with a nod. "And the siblings? They seem well this morning." "Better than well," William confirmed. "It's as if a weight has been lifted. Even beyond the physical restoration, there's a peace about them I haven't seen since Caroline died." "And the necklace?" William touched his chest, where the pendant now rested beneath his shirt once more. "I'll keep it safe but not hidden. Some traditions, it seems, should be preserved rather than forgotten." As his carriage rolled away from the plantation, Dr. Montgomery made one final entry in his journal. "August 12, 1806. I depart Willor today, leaving behind a family restored in body, if forever changed in understanding. The 4 Thornfield siblings who aged in reverse have returned to their proper states through means I hesitate to describe even in these private pages. What I have witnessed defies all medical knowledge and rational explanation. It suggests dimensions to our existence that science has yet to comprehend. Perhaps some mysteries are not meant to be unraveled completely, but rather respected for the boundaries they represent between the known and the unknowable. The oak tree that absorbed the misplaced years continues to thrive with unnatural vigor. William reports it has begun producing acorns for the first time in decades. He intends to plant them across the property, a living legacy of Caroline's influence. As for myself, I find my hair has acquired several new strands of gray since performing the counter ritual. A small price to pay, perhaps. I have requested that William burn this journal upon my death, and he has agreed. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve, even in the name of science. The Thornfield case shall remain, as it must, a medical enigma left unexamined by the wider world. William Thornfield kept his promise to Dr. Montgomery. Upon receiving news of the doctor's death in 1829, he consigned the journal documenting the case to flames. As he watched the pages blacken and curl in the fire, William reflected on how the experience had transformed his understanding of the world and his late wife's heritage. "There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy," he murmured, quoting the Shakespeare his Caroline had so loved. That night he dreamed of her for the first time in years, not as the pale, dying woman who had haunted his memories, but as the vibrant, mysterious girl he had fallen in love with in Philadelphia. In the dream, she smiled approvingly and whispered, "You've learned at last, my love. Some doors are meant to remain open." The doctor's official records, housed in Savannah's Medical Society archives, contain only a brief notation regarding his month-long absence in the summer of 1806. Called away to consult on unusual case at Willor, details withheld at family's request. Yet rumors persisted in medical circles about the brilliant Dr. Montgomery's strange preoccupation with aging disorders and temporal anomalies in his later research, though he published nothing substantial on these topics before his death. In the decades that followed, the Thornfield family prospered. Thomas eventually took over management of the plantation, instituting progressive reforms unusual for Georgia planters of that era. Josephine married a professor of natural philosophy from Boston, combining her mother's mystical knowledge with her husband's scientific approach in groundbreaking ways. Nathaniel became a well-respected doctor, specializing in unusual cases that other physicians deemed hopeless. And Eleanor established a small school for girls on the plantation grounds where, alongside traditional subjects, certain students received more esoteric instruction. The magnificent oak continued to thrive long after trees of its kind would normally have perished, standing sentinel over generations of Thornfields. Local legends eventually arose about its healing properties, with parents bringing sickly children to rest in its shade. Some said that on certain nights when the moon was full and the air heavy with Georgia heat, the flowers around the oak would bloom with particular vibrancy, and time itself seemed to slow for anyone standing in their fragrant midst. Children who grew up on neighboring plantations swore that if you pressed your ear to the tree's massive trunk, you could hear the sound of a woman's gentle laughter carried on the whisper of leaves. As for the silver pendant, it passed from generation to generation of Thornfield women, a symbol of both warning and wisdom, a reminder that time, like all natural forces, demands respect and balance. The last recorded owner was Caroline Thornfield IV, who disappeared mysteriously during the Civil War when Union troops burned Willor to the ground in 1864. The oak, however, survived the fire. It stands to this day, ancient and imposing on land long since converted to a public park. Few visitors notice the unnaturally precise square of white moon flowers that bloom around its base every night, or the faint symbols carved into its lowest branches. Fewer still make the connection to the strange tale of four siblings who, for one remarkable summer in 1806, experienced time's flow in reverse. A medical enigma that remains, as Dr. Montgomery intended, largely unexamined. But perhaps if you find yourself in Georgia near the remnants of the old Thornfield plantation, you might visit the park where the ancient oak still stands. And if you're there at twilight, as the moon flowers begin to open, you might feel a curious sensation, a momentary hiccup in time, a brief suspension of the natural order. Don't be alarmed. It's merely the echo of that long-ago summer when four siblings taught a man of science that some mysteries lie beyond the realm of explanation, in the shadowed borderlands where magic and medicine meet. And if you happen to see a silver pendant with an intricate design of spirals surrounding an eye-like shape, well, perhaps it would be best to leave it where it lies. After all, some enigmas are better left unexamined.